My name is Marcus Reed, I'm 32, and this is the story of an airplane that didn't bomb ships, it hunted them head-on. Before we start, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Let's go. April 1st, 1943. 11,000 feet above the Bismarck Sea. Perfect visibility. Perfect weather. Perfect formation. 18B, 17 Flying Fortresses cruise toward their target, a Japanese destroyer cutting through turquoise water below. Each bomber carries the most advanced targeting technology America can build. The Norden bomb sight, a mechanical computer so secret that crews are trained to destroy it before capture. So precise that pre-war propaganda claimed it could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 4 miles up. The lead bombardier lies flat in the nose of his aircraft, eye pressed to the rubber eyepiece. His hands make microscopic adjustments. Crosshairs settle on the destroyer's narrow silhouette. The ship is 1,700 feet long. From this altitude, it looks like a pencil floating in a swimming pool. Airspeed calculated. Wind drift compensated. Altitude locked. The bomb sight hums, gyroscopes spinning inside their sealed case, making computations no human brain could match. The bombardier's finger hovers over the release. His breathing slows. Everything is perfect. He presses. 500 pounds of high explosive drops from the bomb bay. Then another. Then another. 18 bombers release in sequence, a mathematical cascade of destruction. 72 bombs fall toward one ship. The bombs take 43 seconds to reach the water. 43 seconds, where physics does exactly what the textbooks predict. They arc through the air in perfect parabolas. Wind resistance calculated, terminal velocity achieved. The destroyer's captain sees the bombers overhead. He's seen this before. He doesn't panic. He doesn't radio for help. He simply turns the wheel. The ship begins to turn. Not frantically. Not desperately. Just a casual course correction. The way you'd step around a puddle on a sidewalk. The first bomb hits water 400 feet to the left. The second, 300 feet behind the stern. The third, 200 feet starboard. They keep falling, perfect spirals of American engineering, each one hitting exactly where the ship used to be. Columns of white water erupt around the destroyer in a neat geometric pattern. From above, it looks like someone tried to draw a circle around the ship with explosions. A beautiful, useless circle. Not one bomb touches steel. The destroyer's captain doesn't even change speed. Just maintains his gentle turn until the last bomb falls. Then he straightens out and continues toward his destination. 18 bombers turn for home. Bomb bays empty. Mission failed. This happened again the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because here's what nobody wanted to admit. The entire doctrine was built on a lie. The math was simple, brutal, unavoidable. AB-17 at 11,000 feet releases a bomb. That bomb takes 43 seconds to fall. In 43 seconds, a destroyer traveling at 35 knots moves nearly 1,300 feet. That's 4 football fields. The ship doesn't need to be fast. It doesn't need to be lucky. It just needs to not be in the exact same spot it was when the bombardier pressed the button. The Norden bomb sight could calculate everything, except the future. It could tell you precisely where the ship was. But ships move, and 43 seconds is an eternity. Doctrine said, fly higher, stay safer, let technology solve the problem. Physics said, the higher you fly, the more time the ship has to move, the more impossible your job becomes. Some crews tried flying lower, 8,000 feet instead of 11. The bombs fell faster, 32 seconds instead of 43. The ships moved less, only 900 feet instead of 1,300. Still not enough. At 3,000 feet, the fall time dropped to 19 seconds. The ship only moved 500 feet. But now the bomber was well within range of every anti-aircraft gun the Japanese Navy had bolted to their decks. The Flying Fortress might survive. They were tough planes, but crew members would die. And you still probably wouldn't hit the ship. The problem wasn't the training. American bombardiers were the best in the world. They could hit stationary targets with terrifying accuracy. During training runs over the California desert, they regularly planted bombs within 50 feet of old truck hulks and wooden barracks. But those targets didn't move. The problem wasn't the technology. The Norden bomb site was a mechanical marvel, a genuine work of engineering genius. But it couldn't predict human decisions. The problem was the mission itself. High-altitude horizontal bombing was never designed to kill ships. It was designed to demolish cities, factories, rail yards, things that stayed put. Someone in a clean office had decided it would also work against naval vessels, because the alternative was admitting that America's entire strategic bombing doctrine had a massive, fleet-sized blind spot. So crews kept flying, kept dropping, kept missing. Meanwhile, Japanese convoys sailed wherever they wanted, until one man in New Guinea looked at the numbers and said something unforgivable. His name was Paul Gunn, 43 years old. Civilian pilot turned Army Air Forces officer. No formal military training, no engineering degree, no reverence for doctrine written by men who'd never been shot at. Before the war, he'd flown cargo planes across the Pacific. Bush strips, terrible weather, planes held together with wire and optimism. He had 13,000 flight hours, most of them in situations where the manual would have told him to land immediately and wait for better conditions. He'd learned to trust his hands more than paperwork. When the war started, he'd been in the Philippines. Watched his family evacuate without him. Watched Manila fall. Spent the next year flying anything with wings, bombers, fighters, transports, whatever would hurt the Japanese. He wasn't fighting for democracy or freedom or any abstract principle. He was fighting because they'd taken his family, and he wanted them to suffer. The Army didn't quite know what to do with him. He was too skilled to ignore and too insubordinate to promote. So they gave him a maintenance depot in New Guinea and told him to keep planes flying. He worked out of Townsville, Australia, and Port Moresby, New Guinea. No clean offices. No fresh paint. Just mud, mosquitoes, and aircraft that should have been scrapped months ago. His mechanics worked in 100-degree heat, pulling parts from wrecked planes to keep flyable ones in the air. Gunn walked among the aircraft every day, watching bombers return from missions, counting the bombs they still carried, listening to crews describe ships that simply turned away from their drop patterns. He didn't make speeches. He didn't write reports. He just started asking a question that made everyone uncomfortable. What if we stopped trying to drop bombs on ships from above? Someone asked what he meant. What if we flew straight at them instead? Level flight, 50 feet off the water, fast and low, pointed our nose right at their hull, and just opened fire. The room went quiet. With what? An officer finally asked. Gunn pointed at a B-25 Mitchell bomber sitting on the airstrip. Medium bomber, twin engines, crew of 6, designed for precision strikes from medium altitude. With that, he said, but different. He wanted to remove the bombardier position entirely. Rip out the glass nose. Take the Norden bomb sight, that million-dollar mechanical brain, and throw it in a crate. Then he wanted to bolt machine guns into the nose. 8 of them. 50 caliber Brownings. The same guns that fighter planes carried. But a fighter carried 2, maybe 4 guns. Gunn wanted 8. All facing forward. All firing together. Someone did the math. 8 50 caliber machine guns, firing simultaneously, would produce 4,000 rounds per minute. That's 67 bullets per second. Each bullet half an inch wide, traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Someone else pointed out that AB-25's nose wasn't designed to handle that kind of recoil. The guns would fire with combined force exceeding 6 tons. The plane would shake itself apart. Rivets would pop. Structural members would crack. The nose would fold like aluminum foil. And even if it didn't, the weight would be catastrophic. 8 machine guns, plus ammunition, plus the steel framework needed to mount them. You'd add nearly 2,000 pounds to the front of the aircraft. The center of gravity would shift forward. The plane would nosedive the moment it left the ground. And even if you solved that, the recoil would stall the engines. The plane would shudder to a halt in midair, then drop into the ocean. And even if the engines kept running, the pilot wouldn't survive. The noise alone would rupture eardrums. The vibration would turn internal organs to pulp. It was like strapping a man to a jackhammer, lighting it on fire, and asking him to perform surgery. Gunn listened to all of this, nodded, offered no counter-arguments. Then he said, "Do it anyway." Engineering manuals were shelved. Structural load calculations were ignored. Safety margins, carefully calculated numbers that represented the difference between functional and fatal, were treated as suggestions. Gunn's mechanics started with a single B-25. They unbolted the bombardier station, pulled out the plexiglass nose cone, and exposed the empty cavity where a man used to lie on his stomach, eye pressed to a bomb site. They built a steel framework inside that cavity. Rough welds, thick bolts, nothing elegant. They mounted 4 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, angled slightly downward. Then they added 4 more in blisters on the sides of the fuselage. The guns stuck out like tumors. Ammunition boxes were crammed into every available space. The navigator station became a magazine. The radio operator sat on crates of 50 caliber rounds. They added a crude steel plate behind the cockpit to protect the pilots from their own guns. If a round cooked off from the heat, it would punch through the instrument panel and into the crew. The plate wouldn't stop it, but it might slow it down enough that you die from bleeding instead of hydrostatic shock. The weight calculations were worse than predicted. With full ammunition, the modified B-25 weighed 28,000 pounds. Standard B-25, 21,000. The nose was so heavy that when the plane sat on the runway, the tail lifted off the ground unless someone physically stood on it. The center of gravity had shifted so far forward that the control surfaces barely responded. Pulling back on the stick should have raised the nose. Now it barely twitched. Test pilots refused to fly it. Gunn found one who would. A captain named Ed Larner. Crazy or brave, impossible to tell which. Larner taxied the monster to the end of the runway. Full throttle. The engine screamed. The propellers clawed at the air. The plane rolled forward slowly at first, tail dragging on the concrete. It picked up speed. The tail lifted. The nose stayed down. Larner pulled back on the stick. Nothing. Pulled harder. The plane continued accelerating down the runway, nose pointed at the dirt, refusing to rotate. He was running out of runway. He pulled the stick into his chest, used both hands. The nose lifted grudgingly 5 degrees, 10 degrees. The wheels left the ground. The plane climbed at an angle so shallow it looked like it was taxiing through the sky. Larner leveled off at 500 feet, circled the airfield. The plane handled like a garbage truck, slow to respond, heavy in every axis. It didn't want to turn. It wanted to go straight and stay straight like a bullet. He lined up with a practice target, an old fishing boat anchored in the harbor, descended to 50 feet, leveled off, pointed the nose directly at the boat. He squeezed the trigger. The sound wasn't gunfire. It was a roar, a sustained, metallic thunder that swallowed every other noise. The plane lurched backward in the air, actually decelerated from recoil. The cockpit filled with vibration, so intense that the instruments blurred into unreadable smears. Larner couldn't see the target, couldn't see his controls, could barely see the windscreen through the vibration and the smoke pouring back from the guns. He held the trigger for 3 seconds. Released. The roar stopped. The vibration faded. He blinked, tried to focus. The fishing boat was gone. Not sinking. Not damaged. Gone. Erased. Where there had been a wooden hull, there was now a cloud of splinters floating on the water. The 50 caliber rounds had hit with such concentrated force that they'd simply disintegrated the target. Larner radioed the tower. His voice shook, adrenaline or fear or both. It didn't break, he said. Gunn immediately ordered 4 more conversions. But the plane couldn't just fly and shoot. It had to learn how to kill precisely, because ammunition was finite and targets were fast. The firing rate was overwhelming. 4,000 rounds per minute sounds infinite until you realize you're empty in 45 seconds. After that, you're a slow, heavy bomber with no bombs and no guns, flying straight at warships designed to kill aircraft. Pilots had to learn a new kind of flying. Forget altitude. Forget evasion. Point your nose at the target and keep it there. The plane became the gun sight. If the target was in your windscreen, you were hitting it. But ships shoot back. Japanese destroyers carried multiple 25mm anti-aircraft guns. Light, fast-firing, deadly to low-flying aircraft. The doctrine said to approach from high altitude to stay outside their range. Guns doctrine said to fly directly into their range and get so close that missing was impossible. Pilots practiced over the ocean, flew at 50 feet. The propellers nearly touched the wave tops. At that altitude, there's no margin for error. If you dip the nose 2 degrees, you're swimming. If you pull up too hard, you stall and fall. They practiced firing at targets on the water. Wooden frames, empty fuel drums, anything that floated. The goal wasn't accuracy. The sheer volume of fire made accuracy irrelevant. The goal was control. Keep the nose steady while 8 guns tried to rip it off the airframe. They learned that the first second of firing was the worst. The plane would buck. Pilots had to anticipate the recoil, push forward on the sticks slightly before they fired, compensate for the backward surge. They learned to fire in bursts. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, 3 seconds on. Let the barrels cool. Prevent jams. Make the ammunition last. They learned that you couldn't aim at the ship's center. You aimed at the waterline. Let recoil walk your fire upward. The first rounds would hit the hull just above the waves. The next would hit the deck. The next would hit the superstructure. By the time you released the trigger, you'd stitched a vertical line of destruction through the entire vessel. December 17, 1942. A Japanese supply barge. 50 feet long. Wooden hull. No armor. No escorts. Alone in the Huon Gulf. 3 modified B-25s approached at wave-top height. The barge crew saw them coming. Didn't run. Barges don't run. They just kept going, probably assuming the bombers would pass overhead and drop bombs that would miss. The lead B-25 opened fire at 800 yards. The water between the plane and the barge turned white. Hundreds of 50 caliber rounds hit the surface, skipped, hit again, skipped again, each ricochet carrying them forward until they found wood. The barge didn't sink. It exploded. Fuel drums ignited. Ammunition cooked off. The wooden hull disintegrated into floating debris. The other 2 B-25s didn't even fire. There was nothing left to shoot. The pilots returned to base. They didn't celebrate. They were quiet. They'd expected destruction, but not that kind of destruction. Not instantaneous erasure. Someone asked how it felt. One pilot said it felt like cheating. They hit more barges. Then they hit a troop transport. Larger. Steel hull. Packed with soldiers. Same result. The ship didn't sink gracefully. It shredded. The hull ruptured in dozens of places simultaneously. It listed, flooded, and went down in under 3 minutes. The crews started calling the modified B-25 strafers. Later, someone would call them commerce destroyers. The nickname that stuck was simpler. They called them gunships. March 3, 1943. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Intelligence reported a Japanese convoy heading for New Guinea. 8 troop transports. 8 destroyers. Carrying 7,000 soldiers and enough supplies to hold New Guinea for another 6 months. The convoy was critical. If it landed, the entire theater shifted. Allied positions would collapse. The war in the Pacific would stall. High-altitude bombers had already tried. Flying fortresses. Liberators. Squadrons of them. They dropped hundreds of bombs. Hit nothing. Gunships hadn't faced a real warship yet. Barges, yes. Transports, yes. But destroyers were different. Destroyers were built to kill aircraft. They had radar. They had experienced crews. They had enough anti-aircraft guns to turn the sky into a metal storm. 13 B-25 gunships took off before dawn. They flew low, under the radar. 50 feet above a black ocean, navigating by moonlight and instruments. At 0730, they spotted the convoy. 8 destroyers in a protective screen. 8 transports in the center. The destroyers were already firing at high-altitude bombers overhead. Columns of black smoke dotted the sky. The ships moved in coordinated zigzags, making themselves impossible to hit from above. The gunships stayed low. They came in from the side, out of the rising sun. The destroyer's radar couldn't pick them up through the sea clutter. By the time lookouts spotted them, they were 4 miles out. The Japanese crews saw them coming, saw the B-25s leveled off just above the waves, saw them flying straight toward the convoy, not climbing, not evading. They must have been confused. Bombers don't attack that way. Torpedo bombers do, but these weren't torpedo bombers. These were medium bombers, and they were behaving like fighters. The destroyers opened fire at 2 miles. 25mm tracers arced toward the gunships. The gunships didn't break formation, didn't climb, just kept coming. At 1 mile, the lead gunship opened fire. The destroyer it targeted was the Shirayuki. New ship, modern design, crew of 240 men. They'd trained for high-altitude bombing attacks. They'd trained for torpedo attacks. They had not trained for this. The B-25's 850 caliber guns hit the Shirayuki's bow. The first rounds punched through the thin hull plating like it was paper. The next rounds followed through the same holes, entering the ship's interior. The destroyer's forward compartments were packed with ammunition. Ready rounds for the anti-aircraft guns. The 50 caliber bullets found them. The bow exploded. Not from a bomb. From the ship's own ammunition detonating in a chain reaction. The forward third of the destroyer simply ceased to exist. Where there had been steel and guns and men, there was now fire and smoke and a massive hole that seawater poured through. The Shirayuki's stern lifted out of the water. The ship tilted forward. It went down nose first, sliding into the ocean like a sword into a sheath. 47 seconds from first shot to final sinking. The other gunships spread out. Each picked a target. The destroyers tried to evade, but evasion meant turning, and turning meant exposing their broadsides, and their broadsides were even bigger targets. The Tokitsuke's took fire from 2 gunships simultaneously. 16 guns. 8,000 rounds per minute. The destroyer's superstructure disintegrated. The bridge collapsed. The radio mast toppled. Fires erupted across the deck. The Arashio was hit while firing at bombers overhead. The gunship's rounds hit its aft magazine. The explosion was so violent that it broke the destroyer's keel. The ship split in half. Both halves sank separately. The transports tried to scatter. Useless. They were cargo ships. Slow. Unarmored. The gunships went after them like wolves after wounded deer. The first transport took fire along its entire starboard side. The hull ruptured in 20 places. The ship rolled over and sank in less than a minute. Hundreds of soldiers were trapped below decks. They went down with the ship. The second transport was loaded with fuel drums. The gunship's tracers found them. The ship turned into a floating fireball. Men jumped into the ocean, their uniforms burning. They drowned or burned. There was no third option. By 0900, the entire convoy was gone. 8 destroyers. 8 transports. 7,000 men. Some made it to lifeboats. Some made it to shore. Most didn't. The gunships flew home, ammunition spent, engines overheating. 2 had taken damage from anti-aircraft fire. 1 had a dead engine. All of them landed. Not one had been shot down. The Japanese Navy's response was immediate and telling. They stopped sending convoys without air cover. They stopped sending convoys in daylight. They started routing ships hundreds of miles out of their way to avoid areas where gunships operated. Their doctrine shifted from avoid bombs to avoid low-flying bombers. Lookouts were trained to watch the horizon, not the sky. Anti-aircraft guns were repositioned to fire at sea level. But it didn't matter. The gunships were faster than the ships, lower than the radar. And by the time you saw them, you had less than a minute to live. Over the next 4 months, gunships sank 43 ships. destroyers, cruisers, transports, submarines caught on the surface, anything that floated and flew a Japanese flag. The modification spread. Other air groups started converting their B-25s. The Marine Corps tried it. The Navy tried it. Engineers refined the design, balanced the weight better, added more guns. Some models carried 1450 caliber machine guns. Some added a 75mm cannon in the nose, an artillery piece in an airplane. They fired high-explosive shells the size of your forearm. One hit could sink a small ship. But the war moved. Technology changed. By 1944, American forces had air superiority. They didn't need to strafe ships. They could bomb them from safety. Carrier aircraft took over the anti-ship role. Torpedoes got better. Rockets got better. The gunships got reassigned. Ground attack. Close air support. They strafed bridges, trains, convoys. They were still lethal, still terrifying, but no longer necessary. By 1945, they were obsolete. The last combat mission by 8 B-25 gunship happened in the Philippines. January 1945. A Japanese supply truck. The gunship strafed it, destroyed it, and flew home. After the war, most gunships were scrapped, melted down, recycled into refrigerators and car parts. A few ended up in museums. Quiet, disarmed, surrounded by plaques explaining what they'd done. But the idea survived. The AC-47, the AC-130, modern gunships. They're not B-25s with 50 calibers. They're cargo planes with miniguns, howitzers, and targeting computers. They fly higher, hit harder, see farther. But the principle is identical. Point the plane at the target. Use the aircraft as the weapon platform. Let volume of fire replace precision. The AC-130 can put a round in every square foot of a football field in under 60 seconds. It's Paul Gunn's idea, refined over 80 years. And it started because one man looked at a doctrine that didn't work and decided to ignore it. Not because he was smarter than the engineers. Not because he knew something they didn't. But because he was willing to be wrong in a new way instead of right in a way that didn't matter. Innovation isn't always elegant. It's not always clean. Sometimes it's 8 machine guns bolted to a plane that was never meant to carry them. Sometimes it's recoil that nearly tears the aircraft apart. Sometimes it's flying at 50 feet, straight into gunfire, because the math says you'll die, but the mission says you won't quit. The men who flew those first gunships weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were mechanics and pilots who'd run out of better options. They looked at a problem, ignored the manual, and built something that shouldn't have worked. But it did, and that terrified the enemy more than any bomb ever could. Because a bomb you can evade. A bomb gives you 43 seconds to move. A gunship gives you nothing, just the sound of engines, the roar of guns, and then the water rushing in. Would you have been brave enough to be there? To climb into a plane that engineers said would kill you? To fly straight at a warship and pull the trigger? Most people wouldn't. That's why most people aren't in the history books.